I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. I want to give a few pieces of information for those of you who have joined us already. You will know that we are going to be recording today's session and sending that to you along with the slides a week from today. Also in the chat, I have posted and will post again the link for live captioning. All of your questions during the session should go into the Q&A box, and then we'll be answering those at the end. And then if you just have any comments that you would like to make, please go ahead and put those into the chat box if you want panelists and attendees to see that. I do want to mention before we get started, and I hand this over to today's presenter, that this is going to be Dr. Bethany Simunich, who's the new Director of QM Research and Innovation. And we wanted to give you Bethany's Twitter handle and our hashtag for QM Research here at the beginning so that you can extend this conversation into the Twitter sphere as well. Okay, and now I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Simunich.
Thank you so much, Barbara. So I kept my video on for a hot minute so I could say hi to all of you. I'm going to stop it so I can kind of reduce the bandwidth here. So on that note, I've been having a little bit of connectivity issues today. So Barbara and I are the research team in QM, and we are definitely a team today. She is running the slides from Chicago, and I'm joining you from Ohio with the audio. So we are going to connect together, and hopefully everything will go smoothly. As she mentioned, we do have the Q&A in the chat available. If you have a question that comes to mind during the presentation, please don't hesitate to put it in the Q&A. And there's also going to be some times where I'm going to ask you to put some thoughts or comments in the chat room. So for any of you that have ever done a webinar, you know that it can be a little bit lonely here on the other side, and I really hope that we can have a good conversation today, and then you can join me and share some of your ideas as well. So very happy to be with you all today. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm very excited. I've just completed my first full month as QM's Director of Research and Innovation, and I'm really so happy to be working with QM in this new and wonderful capacity. So today we're going to talk about a little bit about data, a little bit about what we see and what we don't see, and trying to uncover those stories that are, really beneath the data that's right there in front of our face. And I wanted to start out in an unusual way, and not with numbers and not with data, but by telling you a little story about Brene Brown. So I'm sure many of you have heard of Brene Brown. She's a research professor and author, and I think an all-around awesome person. But several years ago, as I was becoming more interested in her work, I read about her research journey and how she became intrigued with the idea of research as story catching. So she had this quote that I read: "Stories are data with a soul." And it struck me and it stuck with me. So while she was using this idea to help explain a grounded theory approach, I think that there's an idea there that all of us as educators and researchers can benefit from. So it's this idea that I return to time and again when I sit down to analyze my own data, whether that data is quantitative or qualitative in nature, and it helps me to remember that data are just discrete pieces of information. The usefulness of data relies on the story it tells, or the story that we tell using the data. So let's get started talking about data. Next slide. Okay, so in the title of the presentation, I use the words superficial data. One definition of superficial is existing or occurring at or on the surface. Now, in terms of data, let's think of that as data that we can easily see or data that we have easy access to. Some common examples for our discussion today might be final course grades, which would be useful data for both individual faculty and also their institution. And another example might be data we have for our faculty development efforts, such as faculty attendance rates or faculty feedback from session evaluations. Another definition of superficial, however, is appearing to be true or real only until examined more closely. And to me, this is the other part of what I'm trying to convey with the term superficial data, that what we see on the surface is often only a very small part of the story until we examine things more closely. So the real story is what we cannot readily see, what lies beneath. So this is additional information that provides the context that we need to really understand what our data is trying to say. Below the surface lie other factors that really might have heavily influenced the data that we have, or might influence the interpretation of the data that we have. Additionally, we may need to consider the context surrounding our surface data that might provide clues for barriers or obstacles, or sometimes even opportunities. We also need to pay special attention to whether our data reflects attitudes or beliefs, as what lies beneath that data might include issues related to misconceptions or previous experience, or even aspects related to psychology or sociology or communication, such as a sense of belonging or feelings of motivation or self-efficacy. And that's what we're going to focus on today. Identifying some of the common data that we have, or data we can collect, discussing why that data is really only a small part of the story, and then talking about ways to interpret the data against other influencing or contextual factors so that it becomes really useful for us in our quality assurance efforts. Okay. So I felt like this was the perfect image because most of us are drowning in data. You know, a different question is it's useful data? But let's focus first on the example of student data. In the case of student data, in some ways our iceberg has melted and we're drowning. As individual faculty, you might have common data such as individual assignment grades and final course grades. You may also have student feedback surveys or evaluations of instruction. And then we also have data that we can gather from our learning management system, such as frequency and duration of course logins, or whether or not students have clicked on an item, for example. Looking at it from the institutional angle, we might have those same pieces of information across all courses, as well as other institutional data such as drop-fail withdrawal rates, retention data, or completion data. So let's look first at student data by asking the #1 question that I get asked, and that I know Barbara has gotten asked many times over the years, and is probably on your mind as well, which is, how does quality matters impact student learning? So just to let me know that you're there and you're paying attention and you're live, go ahead and type in the chat. Just give me a yes, you've wondered that a million times before, or you'd love to know the answer to that. And there the yeses come in. Yes, yes, yes. Okay. And you know, when I was working at institutions, that was my big question too, because I know, I've been a QMC. I have implemented QM at an institutional level, and I know the work that it entails and how much we believe in the work that we're doing there, right? So we want to see if those efforts are paying off because we're doing it for the students, right? So, for example, the setting for our story here could be a standalone QM certified course. It could be a course within an online degree program, or we could be looking at all QM certified courses across the institution. But the superficial data that we're looking at is final grades. Now, I do want to say here that when we're measuring student learning, most often we do see people looking at final grades, researchers looking at those final grades. It is a different conversation, and I would love to have that, maybe a nice coffee chat with y'all at another time, whether or not that's a really good measure of student learning. But right now we're going to talk about it in terms of final course grades, course grades. So let me ask you first, what do you think lies beneath the data that we have here in final course grades? In other words, whether we're an individual faculty member or an institution, we want to know if students who take QM certified courses have better grades than students who take courses that have not been QM certified. So what factors might influence that outcome of grades other than whether or not the course has officially met QM standards in a formal review? Take a minute now and go ahead and type some ideas in the chat box. And just to let you know, there are no right or wrongs in this webinar, but don't leave me out here all alone. I want to hear from you. Okay, so I got some answers here. All right, so looking at our assessments, do we have the measure of formative versus summative assessment, students' personal circumstances, their life, student support, the rigor of the course. Oh, on that note, if you all have not read that wonderful 3-part series that Quality Matters put out last year um, from Andrea Schweigler, it's wonderful. You should check it out. Student engagement, technology issues, social belonging and social engagement. Yes, yes. Okay, so you all are really right on the mark, and you're already thinking about all these things that influence it, right? So what lies beneath are all those things that you're mentioning. Clarity of instructions, that's another one. Yes. So in this case, what lies beneath is a whole host of influencing variables, such as whether or not our students were ready to be successful learners. So several of you mentioned student readiness there. So for example, did they have any orientation or training for the LMS? And what is their level of academic preparedness, right? So, maybe you're teaching an English course that's writing intensive. Do students need some remediation in writing or some writing help, for example? There's also a lot of life factors that can influence grades, such as whether a student is juggling one or more jobs or is a parent. Our quality of teaching is a huge impacting factor as well, as teaching presence, as you know, begins with the design of your course, but it follows through in the delivery in ways that we interact with students by providing guidance, feedback, and even encouragement. We can also point to content and assignments as influencing factors, and a number of you mentioned that in the chat as well. So if you're familiar with general standards 3 and 4 of the QM rubric, for example, you know that standard 4.1 relates to alignment of instructional materials to learning objectives, but it doesn't prescribe what material should be in the course. So for example, we could have a course that meets QM standards using the content of textbook readings and video lectures. Okay, while another course uses those items as well as additional material, such as case studies or excerpts from film or other media or simulations. So do you think that those types of additional material might have an impact on grades? Yes or no? Yes. Okay, I'm getting mostly yeses. Yeah. So whether or not the material is engaging, whether or not in the sense of does it invite cognitive engagement from your students, that could definitely impact grades. Right? As another example, we know that there are specific review standards that are related to alignment of assessments and variety and sequencing of assessments, but those standards do not prescribe the exact type of assignments to include in your course. So we might have one course that utilizes quizzes, discussions, and exams, all very common for online courses. But another course has students creating mind maps to explore a concept, or scenarios and role playing to embed students within real life situations, or even reflective assignments that are also geared towards allowing students to become more self-directed learners. So do you think that the type of assignment or how the assignment reflects levels of Bloom's taxonomy, such as application, might have an impact on grades? And I'm going to go to the chat here for a minute. Barbara, we see you, but we've lost the slides, just as an FYI, which is okay. Okay, so I got a bunch of absolutelys and yes. And for those of you that had a longer comment that's scrolling, please feel free to go and visit the Q&A, because your question will always stick there, right, until Barbara or I address it. Okay, so even though we might have two courses that meet QM standards, those courses, of course, can still be very different, because it's up to the individual faculty member for what they choose to include as content or choose to include as assessments. Okay, so the next slide, and Barbara is getting back on the slides. See, we are a team, Barbara. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to talk about is in relation to this question of how does QM impact student learning. It's also often asked as a way to evaluate the progress or effectiveness of QM implementation. It's a good question and it's an important one, and later on I'll talk more about ways that we can collaborate to answer this question together. But whether we're looking at this question from the individual course level or across the institution, we really can't properly analyze this grade data without knowing what we're really comparing. Okay, so most often, again, when we're talking about how does QM impact students, what we're really trying to do is compare the course as it was before it met QM standards to the course as it was after it met QM standards. So let me think. I'm trying to see what slide you're on, Barbara. Go ahead and advance it. Keep going. And 3 more. 1 more. Nope. Back. 2. Keep going back. 1 more. There we go. Yay, team research. We got this. Okay, thanks for bearing with us, everybody. All right. So it is a good question, but when we're looking at it from the before and after, if we really want to show impact, we need to really understand that situation before the course was QM certified, right? Because as much as possible, we really need to make sure that what we're comparing is apples to apples, not apples to oranges. So for example, what were the grades before the course was QM certified? What are the specific design changes that were made prior to the course going up for a formal QM review, and how were those documented? So as one suggestion, if you're looking to do this type of before QM certification and after QM certification research, you could do an informal QM review of the course, preferably using a certified peer reviewer from your institution or outside your institution, and then record the standards that were met and not met, and then keep a clear and detailed record of all the design changes made to the course before it's put up for a formal QM review. You may, for example, find that working on the alignment standards has a bigger impact for your course or your institution than working on other standards. Maybe you already have a lot of standards met because you're using an LMS template. So that's just one example there. In our before and after, though, we'd also want to know if our student cohort is the same in the before as the after. So we might collect some student demographic information that speaks to academic ability, such as GPA, interest and motivation, such as major, or lifestyle factors, such as demands on student time, like jobs or family. So many of the aspects that you all had mentioned in the chat before. If we're looking at a single course, ideally, we'd want to make sure it's the same instructor teaching the before version as the after version, but we'd also need to consider things such as whether or not the instructor engaged in any faculty development prior to teaching the redesigned after version, right? So for example, as you know, QM offers online workshops for online teaching, and even the workshops focused on design discuss ideas and strategies that influence teaching. So I bring that up only as one way to say that it's very hard to isolate design. It's hard to isolate design from teaching. It's hard to isolate design from student readiness. But this is the type of thinking that you really want to do if you're interested in these before and after studies. Okay, next slide, please, Barbara. Okay, so for those of you who have taken the Applying the QM rubric workshop, you might already be thinking, hey, I recognize these additional influencing factors because you remember this slide that talks about the online quality pie, right? So this graphic of the online quality pie helps us keep in mind that design is just one factor that influences quality online learning. This is why Quality Matters is an integral part of institutional quality assurance plans, but why it's only one part and not a magic bullet or not a panacea. QM implementation ideally is accompanied by other individual or institutional efforts, such as those aimed at student readiness or preparing faculty to teach well online. It's also why the question, or the answer to the question of does QM positively impact student grades, is a yes, but answer. Yes, we have research that shows that QM has a positive impact on grades, but it's not a simple question with a simple answer. All right, to better illustrate that, let's go back to our iceberg and on to the next slide. So this is a tale of two courses. Imagine that these two icebergs represent two courses that have achieved QM certification, and our superficial data is grades. So for course A, grades stayed the same from before the course was certified. For course B, yikes, the grades went down. What's going on here? So let's go to the next slide and look at course A first. So in starting with course A, go ahead and start to type in the chat box some ideas for why we might see no difference in the before QM certification and after QM certification grades. Now, for the sake of our data story, let's say that we did not do a QM informal review in the before, but that the course did meet standards in the initial QM formal review without very many changes to the design at all. Right? So go ahead and take a minute. What are some of your thoughts as to why we might see no change in grades here? Okay, so Karen says the course didn't change much itself. Right. The course may have already been close to meeting certification, already had alignment. Hopefully the instructor did not change the course after the review was complete, but that's a good idea though. That might happen. Okay, faculty knowledge and delivery. The course design was already good. Your sample change, you're looking at different students. Absolutely. Course was designed with QM in mind. Okay, so you are hitting the nail on the head. This example mirrors an actual research study where an institution was looking at grades before and after QM formal certification. When they found no significant difference in grades, they did the smart thing and they dug deeper below that superficial data and uncovered the real story. And the story is exactly as you all have predicted. QM had already become embedded in their design process, and courses were being designed from the start with QM in mind. So they didn't do a course review of the before version, so they weren't truly aware that QM standards were already being met in the before, and that they probably shouldn't have expected to see a big change in the after version. Okay, so let's move on to course B and our next slide. Yeah, so Bruce, you pointed out a good comment there in the chat. The number of students is too small for data to be useful. And I want to respond to that really good comment, because sometimes we're looking at this data individually for ourselves. So we might be doing SOTL type of research or action research, or you may just be looking at how your course is faring and how your students are reacting to changes that you're making in the design. So in those types of situations, we're really not looking at it as a research project per se, or validity and reliability of the data, or what survey measures are we using. We're really just looking for some of that informational feedback that's going to guide us for, are we on the right track? Right? So those, of course, could become fully fledged research projects. And yes, if they're quantitative in nature, those are exactly the things that you'd want to pay attention to, things like sample size. Absolutely. Okay, so let's turn back to course B and turn our attention to the story that course B is trying to tell us. So in this example, course grades went down after a course was QM certified. So go ahead and type in the chat box some ideas for why you think this might have happened. Now, our data story here is that we don't have any data from the before version of the course other than student grades. But the faculty member completed the QM workshops, assessing your learners and designing your online course, and they encountered new ideas for assessments where previously they had relied only on multiple choice quizzes and exams. So what do you think might be going on here? Okay, so maybe the course wasn't well designed to begin with. The course became more rigorous. I see a lot of that. Rigor increased, course became harder. Yes, yes, yes. The instructor might have changed. That's right, because we don't know yet if we've held that variable constant by having the same instructor. Okay, that's a very good thought too. Maybe they tried to do things that they were unsure of what to do. And I know when I was full-time faculty, you know, you're always in that place of having this great idea and having a little bit of hesitancy with implementing it, because there's a learning curve sometimes. There's a learning curve sometimes for both you and students. And yes, you have to prepare both of those parties. Changes in prerequisites. Okay. You guys are really on the ball today. I really appreciate this interaction. Okay, so this is a fictitious example, but my hunch is it could be an actual piece of research, because what happened in the interim that lies between before and after was that the instructor designed a more cognitively rigorous course. You were all absolutely right, where students were spending more time applying information and wrestling with those course concepts in complex ways, and then also had time for reflection, right? So the before version wasn't nearly as rigorous. To do well in the before version, students were asked to understand and remember enough information to do well on multiple choice tests. But in the after version, their brain was definitely working harder. The big question here is, how did we support learners to do well in this newly revised rigorous course? And that's the big takeaway for any of you interested in doing a before and after type study. For those studies, it's not just about what lies beneath, but also what's happened in the time in between before and after. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so I want to pause here to talk about data that all too often I feel we forget to collect, but really can be integral to understanding the story that our superficial data is trying so hard to tell us, and that is student feedback data. Okay, most of us have student evaluation of instruction data, but how often does that really provide you with student feedback on the design of the course, right? And that in truth is the type of data that we really need to make good decisions when we revise our course. For example, you can include short end of module feedback surveys that talk about how many hours it took them to complete the module, which would give you information on whether the workload was appropriate. Or you might ask them questions early on about if they can readily find important items, which will give you information on whether your navigation is logical and efficient. And for those of you following along at home, you know that's specific review standard 8.1. Next slide. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, not enough. We really don't get to see student feedback. That's a very good comment, Jeffrey. So you might also ask if your students, if they received helpful feedback in time to put that feedback to work on their next assignment, which would give you information on specific review standards 3.5 and 5.3. It's also helpful to ask students which assignments or content items most contributed to their learning, so that you'll know what to cut and what to keep if you find that students are taking way more time than you anticipated to complete each module. Next slide, please. Okay, so speaking of feedback, let's next turn our attention to probably the second most asked question, which is related to evaluating our faculty development efforts. So give me a yes in the chat if you are somebody that's involved with working with faculty, maybe as an instructional designer, or you work in faculty development, maybe within a Center for Teaching and Learning. Okay, yay, there's all my IDs and my CTL people, wonderful. Okay. So many of you want to know if the presentations and workshops that faculty are attending result in outcomes such as increased knowledge and skills, higher instructor satisfaction, higher self-efficacy for online teaching, or whether faculty feel prepared for a QM review. In some situations, you may be engaging with QM professional development, while in other situations, you might be combining that with your own faculty development workshops or even certificates that were created and are delivered by your institution. For faculty development efforts, we sometimes don't look at those efforts as opportunities for research or even just to collect some data. My experience is we're even less likely to gather data on the before picture here, meaning before faculty engage with professional development. Often the only data that we have are attendance or completion records. In some cases, we might also have faculty feedback from evaluation surveys. But just as it's important to ask students for feedback, for those of us who work with faculty, such as I mentioned, instructional designers, or those of you who work in your centers for teaching and learning, it's vital that we also gather feedback and other data from faculty so that we can best determine the success of our workshops and trainings, and also how best to continue to support them. Okay, so let's go to an example. In this example, we have a fully online degree program, and we've developed a QM implementation plan so that all the courses in the program will first get certified, and then we were going to pursue a program certification. Okay, so our plan here is to start by hosting a face-to-face session of the Applying the Quality Matters rubric workshop so that all faculty in this program can complete the workshop as a cohort and have those really good, rich conversations that we want them to have. We have the attendance data, and we'd also have access to the anonymous evaluation survey that faculty complete at the end of the APP QMR. So you know the drill by now. Go ahead and start typing in the chat. What other factors aside from APP QMR completion might influence whether faculty feel prepared for a QM review or even feel prepared to teach online? In other words, we know that the APP QMR introduces them to applying the QM rubric, and they have several hands-on practice opportunities in the workshop to apply specific standards. But what else might we need feedback on to see if our faculty feel prepared and supported? Okay, follow-up surveys, comfort level with technology, availability of technology. Okay, so technology is coming up a lot. And okay, Jennifer Davis, you were right. APB-QMR is not about delivery, right? Okay, unfamiliarity with alignment of standards to pedagogy. Right, always having a tech plan B like Barbara and I do today. Knowledge of accessibility and how to do that formatting, understanding the students. Okay, yes, yes, absolutely. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide, because again, all of you really just hit the nail on the head there. When we're looking at whether our faculty feel prepared to design a course that meets QM standards or serve as the course representative on a formal QM review, the answer depends on many things, including knowledge and skills as well as attitudes and beliefs. For example, some faculty want additional training on how to design and review for alignment in their course. They may, for example, seek out information on backward design and use that as their instructional design model as they design their course with the QM rubric in hand. It's also important to keep in mind that the APB-QMR is a deep but short dive into the QM rubric, and some faculty might benefit from a longer dive or more professional development, such as QM's Designing Your Online Course workshop. The availability of IDs or individuals from our CTL centers is another important influential factor. As we all know, a big barrier for faculty in designing high-quality courses is often whether or not they have the time available that they need. Being able to collaborate with an ID, though, for example, can lessen the design time and result in both a well-designed course and a faculty member who feels well supported. This information, though, can also be impacted by other ways an institution supports faculty in online learning, with many of the ways that all of you mentioned in the chat there. So their familiarity with technology or having an LMS template that incorporates good organization and navigation and many of the QM standards from the start, so that faculty have that head start on their course design. How many of you have an LMS template at your institution? Give me a yes if you do. Okay, many of you. All right. If it's something that either you're thinking about doing but not sure where to start, or you want to learn more about, there's definitely lots of good information, lots of recordings from past presentations from QM conferences, where individuals from institutions came to talk about their LMS template and what went into that and how they developed it. Right? So there's definitely more information there for you if you'd like to follow up with that. And many institutions also have example syllabi or sample welcome letters or online policies to then additionally support faculty in their quality assurance efforts. And finally, let's not forget about the heavy influence that can come from attitudes and beliefs. These could be attitudes and beliefs about online learning efficacy, whether they feel prepared to teach online, or their comfort level with technology. Right? And I can, speak from my own experience that I was a former face-to-face instructor, very happy teaching face-to-face. And when I first got asked to teach online, I thought it was going to be easier. I thought it'd be very convenient because I could teach from home. I wouldn't have to come into campus as much. I had no idea what I didn't know. I had no idea what I was in for. And when I taught my first online class, I had a lot of attitudes and beliefs, and a lot of them truthfully were related to my own lack of knowledge about technology, my own fears about new strategies that I might have to learn for teaching in this new type of classroom. So there was a lot of emotions, for me at least, wrapped up in moving my teaching online. So any of you know faculty, that have experienced that, where you kind of have to reevaluate who you are as an instructor in this new type of online classroom and how you're going to relate to your students, right? So Carolyn's saying many instructors have beliefs about online learning which influence their beliefs about the kind of students that seek it out. That's a very good point as well. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so onto this idea of online learning efficacy, just to address this question in case any of you are wondering, or maybe you have been asked it. There is no significant difference found in the research that we have comparing online learning to face-to-face learning, right? So at this point, if we can move forward into a new era, I'd love to move forward into the new era of, yes, online learning is equal. We don't have to ask the question anymore, and we can start focusing on some other things. A great place to dive into this research, though, is the No Significant Difference website. And I will put the link for that in the chat, or Barbara might, but we'll definitely get that link to you. The No Significant Difference database was first established in 2004 as a companion piece to Thomas Russell's book, The No Significant Difference Phenomenon. But it's a fully indexed, comprehensive research bibliography of 355 research reports, summaries, and papers that document no significant differences in student outcomes between alternate modes of education delivery. Okay. The site was redesigned in 2010 and is now provided as a service from WESET, a division of the Western, hang on, I'm putting the link in the chat, a division of the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education. You may also want to check out the Online Learning Efficacy Research Database, which comes out of Oregon State's eCampus Research Unit. Anybody here from OSU today, Oregon State? So I'm going to pop the link to that in the chat as well. Okay, now this database is a searchable resource of academic studies on the learning outcomes of online or hybrid education in comparison to face-to-face environments. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so just as some closing thoughts before we get into some discussion, some other questions, keep in mind that when you're using course or institutional data, or even using QM data, the data are depending on you for a full and accurate interpretation, which means going beneath the data you have to fully consider all the influencing factors and contexts that lie underneath your data. It's so important to avoid making assumptions before we have the full picture in place. So to illustrate in our student grades example, had we not dug underneath the data, our assumption would have been that a QM certified course causes no changes in grades or results in lower grades, but that wasn't the case. For course A, the courses were already meeting most standards upon initial design, but we didn't do an informal review. For course B, we learned that we have to perhaps employ some student readiness techniques or build more scaffolding into the course to help students ramp up to the new level of work and higher expectation. Okay. Next, so some of you are saying the links aren't working. All right, we will check those out for you and we'll make sure that you get them. No worries. Okay. So it really means considering what the data doesn't say, because with numbers, whether it's final grades or attendance data, we know we don't have the full picture. And I know that our real intent when we embark on these evaluation efforts or full-fledged research efforts, as we talked about just a little bit before, is not just to measure the success of our QM implementation, but also to really uncover those additional factors that influence those efforts, right? Those are the underlying issues that I was talking about. We can't go full steam on redesigning a course or an entire program without considering, ideally from the start, other parts of that online quality pie, like how we're supporting students to be successful online learners and how we're helping faculty discover the teaching strategies and methods that work well for them in the online classroom. In other words, quality assurance is a 360-degree commitment. If you want to know how QM can help with these efforts, please don't hesitate to reach out. Barbara and I can always help connect you to the right people at QM for the information and support that you need, even if it's not related to research. Okay, so other parts of that pie require the same purposeful efforts as you're currently putting into course design to really elevate the level of your online learning offerings. Also, if you're looking to conduct independent research, consider your data needs from the beginning, right? So if you're doing a full-fledged research project, maybe with the intent to publish, there may be data that you need but you don't have access to or can't get access to, or data that you might have to collect yourself, including feedback surveys that you may need to create. Okay, now lastly, I had mentioned near the beginning of this webinar that I talk more about the ways to collaborate on before and after studies. It's important to keep in mind that Quality Matters does not have access to any course or institutional data. So the answer to the big question of how does QM impact student learning is a question that we are asked, but an answer that must come from all of you. The reason QM has an answer to that question at all is because of the immense knowledge and efforts of our membership and the researchers such as yourself who've sought to answer that question in their own course or on their own campus. So if you're interested in this type of study, one great next step is to enroll in the ABCs of Online Learning Research Workshop. I'm putting a shameless plug in here only because there's a session that begins next week and I do get to facilitate the next session. So I don't always facilitate them. It's either me or one of our amazing research colleagues, but I am facilitating the session next week and I really love to interact with all of you through that workshop. So it's something to consider, and it's a great idea if there's even a small cohort from your institution that wants to enroll together. But I'll be there to walk you through each and every step of designing your research project as you get feedback from myself and then also your colleagues that are in the workshop to draft and refine and complete the design of your research study. If you're further along in your research, it's not too late to reach out and just have a quick consultation with Barbara and myself. Individually and collectively, trust me, we have experienced a lot of the pitfalls of online learning research, and we're happy to provide some quick guidance so that you too can contribute to what we know about the impact of Quality Matters. Okay. For all before and after studies, though, it is vital to really get that baseline data so you know where you're starting from. Then document any changes made and also consider confounding variables or things that ideally are both addressed and held constant in the before and the after, such as having an effective online instructor and having the same instructor for both the before and the after. Finally, when you're thinking about data or research, please consider gathering student and faculty feedback data via those anonymous surveys or even interviews and focus groups. Okay, so pausing to check out the chat here a little bit. Give me a yes if you have ever thought about doing this type of before and after study. And yes, Michelle, we'll send out information about the workshop. Absolutely. Okay, so many of you are thinking about it or know faculty who've been thinking about it. Okay, so I would say from my experience, and I had the good fortune to be involved with Barbara and Kay Shattuck since around 2012. And this is probably the type of study that I've talked to most people about. Barbara's probably nodding her head in Chicago while I'm over here nodding my head in Ohio. Looking at the before and after because we want to measure that impact of QM, right? So speaking of the impact of Quality Matters, if you're interested in reading more about the impact of QM, including the studies that we currently have showing its impact on students, be sure to check out the QM Impact Summary page on the QM website, and I'm going to pop the link to that right here in the chat. Hopefully that one will work. Again, don't panic if any of these links or anything don't work. We will totally get you all this information, don't worry. So I put the link for this in the chat, but you can see right there linked at the top of the page is the downloadable paper authored by Dr. Kay Shattuck, QM's founding director and senior advisor for research. It's about 55 pages long, but it was something that Kay updated periodically as well, and it really talks about what we're learning from QM research and the impact of Quality Matters. So definitely, if you haven't had a chance to read that, please do. Okay, so remember that QM is here, I am here, Barbara is here to help support you as you dive deeper to explore all the contributing factors to the data that you currently have or the data that you can see. There is the searchable research, we lost the slide, but it does have the little screenshot there. There's a searchable research library database. And how many of you have used the research library database? Give me a yes in the chat. Okay. It's making me smile so much that I'm seeing a lot of familiar names. I know many of you, wonderful. Okay, so many of you have already used that. It's a wonderful database. You can search by keyword, you can search by standard, and we're also, thinking and devising ways to revise it and potentially, roll out a new section of it or a new version of it from 2020 or beyond, really based on how all of you in the QM community are using it and really what you're asking for, right? But right now there are so many articles in there. I don't know if Barbara happens to know off the top of her head how many hundreds or thousands of articles are in there, but a lot of them, and she helps to vet them as well. The other thing that you may want to look at is the online research toolkit. And that guides you step by step through kind of designing your research project. How many of you have ever interacted with the research toolkit? Oh, and Lissa said yes, and Barbara is awesome. I would very much agree. Barbara is the most awesome, yes.
And I will just butt in and say that there are over 1,600 references.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that. I didn't know it's that
Yeah.
many. Okay. All right. So, all right, Peter, you said just this past week. Okay, that's wonderful. All right. So those are 3 ways definitely that we can help get you started. That plus the QM impact summary, and then also please don't hesitate to reach out and shoot me an email. Okay. So we do have a good 15 minutes less, which is about what I exactly planned. So I'm very excited about that. What questions do you have? I'm going to go over to the Q&A. Do you have any resources for how to structure QM research before and after studies? A handout or something? I did list a lot of things very quickly. You're right. Actually, it is funny that you should ask that question, because one of the first things that I started thinking about when I came to QN in January was maybe there's a way to develop some, I'm going to use the word template. I'm not sure if that's the word I want, but bear with me, some templates for some of the common research designs that I've been seeing in the ABC's workshop. And definitely one of those is the before and after studies. So yes, that's a great idea, and definitely something that we're thinking about doing. So we will keep you updated on that, because I know a lot of you want to do before and after studies. They're one of those, I think, that are the most important to do, but it's also just as important to really get that design right and make sure that you're isolating what you want to isolate, right? So yeah, we're already thinking about ways that we can help you even more with that. Okay. Oh, and thank you, Carol. You popped the link there in the Q&A. Okay. What if the burden of proof is on us to show that QM actually works and worth the investment of institution? We wouldn't be able to easily push out successful stories as evidence of QM effectiveness. Okay. So, having been on both sides, now that I'm inside QM and having been, outside QM and working as the QMC, and I was facilitator, reviewer, and like many of you wore all the hats. I really tended to see it as not a us and them relationship, but as we're in this together. And that's really how I hope that all of you feel. Part of it is how Barbara and I can help you conduct this research. We have collaborated with individuals before on this. We've given just some guidance and advice. We also try to do that in a more formal, systematic way in the research workshops that we provide. Right? So those are some of the things that we're thinking about, because again, the hard part for us who are inside of QM is we don't have access to your student data. So we can't do these studies unless we collaborate with you on them or we help you conduct them, right? So any of those ideas for working with us on that, or if you're somebody that has access to data, but maybe you're not terribly, interested in doing the research, please reach out to us, because, maybe we can collaborate in that manner as well. I think that if we approach it from the idea of we are all in this together because we're all in this for the same reason. We want to improve student learning achievement. We want students to graduate in a timely fashion, being well prepared for their careers and knowing what we wanted them to learn in the courses and the programs, right? We want high degrees of faculty satisfaction. We want our faculty to be supportive, and we're all working towards those same goals. So thinking of ways, I think, to collaborate together would be great. Okay, some faculty think that having a survey for students after every module is too much to ask. Yeah, and that's something that really I think should be up to that individual faculty, unless it's an initiative for the institution or initiative for a program. Okay, so for example, in my own courses, especially if I've just redesigned it or I've just designed it brand new and it's the first time or the first 2 times that I'm teaching it, I personally do want to put those student feedback surveys at the end of each module. Now, my student feedback surveys are 5 questions, right? Students answer them anonymously. I choose to give my students some points for answering them because that information is so vital to me and I see it as their participation as well, right? It's a feedback loop. But if that's the barrier that you or your faculty don't want to put one in after each module, that's okay. You might consider doing one at the point of the midterm, and then also having an additional survey maybe that you ask at the end, so that you don't just have that student evaluation of instruction, but you have some other data to look at there. Is there research on how QM is learning or improving the QM rubric? Well, there always is data that comes out that informs the rubric revision committee, right? So anytime that the rubric is updated, and Barbara's probably nodding in Chicago to this, there is, let me tell you, so much work that goes into really informing that rubric committee the best that we can for what is the latest in online learning research, how are folks using the rubric. We look at things like inter-rater reliability for course reviews. So are there any standards maybe that have a great deal of variation or that we see might be problematic in some way? So we kind of quote unquote study the rubric in that way because yes, it is consistently improved and updated to reflect the latest and greatest for what we know in online learning research. Good question. Is there any research that disaggregates student outcomes in QM courses by ethnicity and race? That's a good question. This is actually something I've been thinking about a little bit more lately. Barbara, do you know of any research off the top of your head that really looks at that?
There may be a little bit. We do have some research from historically Black colleges and universities that was done there, but of course that again isn't breaking out students by ethnicity and race. But there may be just a little bit, but that is something that seems to be an interest more currently than it has been actually in the past. And it was,
Which is good, yeah.
yeah, which, so originally, foundationally, I guess people were just trying to make sure overall, how are we doing for students? So we're just starting to get to that stage where now we're trying to break out different categories of students.
Yeah, that is a very good question though, and I would say something that a lot of researchers and educational research are talking about. So if it's something that you're interested in, you have even an idea for a study in mind, please reach out to us and we can help talk through that a little bit. How about IRB? Okay, so so for those of you that don't know, that's the Institutional Review Board. You probably have one at your institution. If you are interested in conducting research that you intend to discuss or present at a conference, or you want to publish or anything such as that, you are going to have to get IRB approval, right? So your IRB folks at your campus are best equipped to help you with that. If it's a collaborative project between Quality Matters and one institution or several institutions, those institutions really get the IRB approvals that they need to get. Because QM is a nonprofit, we don't have an IRB board, but you would be the ones collecting data or providing the data. But definitely something that I have knowledge about, and if you have any individual specific questions about that, please don't hesitate to reach out. Retention is a big factor that can be measured. You're absolutely right, Carol. And one thing to keep in mind for those of you that are, maybe you're just starting to think about retention or completion, keep in mind that retention is different than persistence and it's different than completion. Retention really refers to retaining those students from the first year to the second year, right? It doesn't count in transfer students, and it doesn't mean that you're retaining students for 4 years, right? So keep in mind that you may want to look at different things depending on what your institution is interested in. Surveys measuring students that do not succeed in an online course might be interesting. Okay, so you're thinking, Carol, maybe about why students might not be successful and trying to dig underneath that to see if there's any factors that we could help with. I think that would be a very good idea, yeah. Okay, is there a difference between different types of schools? Say, for example, a school for nursing compared to liberal arts or others. my hunch is there would be a lot of differences because that's part of the institutional context, right? And the institutional context and the type of school also, of course, can attract a different type of student. So, for schools for nursing, typically you have nursing professionals that are, coming back to continue their degree, or it's that RN to BSN type of program. Whereas you might not have that if somebody was in the undergraduate degree in biology, for example. But so yes, that's a really good thing to keep in mind, that you really have to think about, what is the type of school that you're in, and also keep in mind what type of students are, at your school or in your class. Barbara, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to add that a lot of the references in the QM Research Library have to do with studies that were done about, say, an introductory psychology course at a certain type of an institution, or looking at students in a college of nursing. So you can always type in keywords there and see, because a lot of times those studies will look at something like how to stimulate interaction with a certain type of course or a certain type of students.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I wanted to say that I noticed there in the chat, somebody asked, do we have templates for the evaluation of faculty development programs? No, but I'm going to say not yet, because I've recently gotten several questions right in a row about that very topic, evaluation of faculty development programs. So it's something that I've spent some time thinking about, and is kind of on my radar in the same way that before and after sort of template might be. So hopefully we can have something, to discuss or bring to you in 2020. Okay, is there research on how different programs might need sort of different QM rubrics, like cybersecurity versus psychology, or do you try to keep it universal, sort of a blanket policy for all courses exactly the same? Okay, so Ben, if I'm understanding your question, you're asking whether or not the type of course or the content matter of the course, the discipline of the course would be affected, you would use a different QM rubric depending on the content or the discipline. No, there is sort of, one QM higher education rubric to rule them all. I worked in a Lord of the Rings reference there, everybody. One QM higher education rubric to rule them all. There is also, though, a QM K through 12 rubric and a publisher rubric. And if you don't know, there's also a continuing and professional education rubric. But the standards in the QM rubric are instructional design standards, right? So they universally apply to all educational courses regardless of discipline. But that's a very good question. Okay. Nicole's asking, hi Nicole, do you have survey instruments already available to use for research? Boy, it's like they're reading our minds, isn't it, Barbara?
For sure.
Okay, so this is something that literally is in the works right now. Okay, it was an idea that I had kind of jogging in my mind last fall, and then I talked about it with Barbara and Kay has actually been diving into this, right? So she is looking at that. We also have some research colleagues, because I think it's, I started thinking about this most because the ABCs of online learning workshop, and because we only have 3 weeks in there, I thought of ways to try to get people to kind of, get a head start. And one of those might be to pre-find for some people, or locate in advance some of those validated surveys. So yes, that is on our list, and we are 100% doing that. So that's in the works, and we hope to have that for you. Well, we'll definitely have it in 2020. I won't make any promises beyond that, but it's coming. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I just would like to thank everybody for attending our webinar today, and to Bethany also for presenting. I think there's been a lot of great information and questions being asked, so that's awesome. I have popped up a slide about the ABCs of online learning research, and that next session begins on February 19th. If you were to go to the QM website and professional development under research, you'd be able to find the workshop there. And also that we have a couple of conferences coming up in April, California and New York. So I did want to mention those. at this time, I'd like to
And I will
stop. Oh, go
be
ahead.
at both of them.
That's right.
Yeah, I was just going
Bethany's
to
going
say
to be
I
at
will be at
both of
both those
them.
conferences. So if any of you want to, snag me and have a coffee chat, and you're attending one of those conferences, please do find me.
And at this time, I'd like to have the recording stopped. And